Hola, catch fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com, joined by Connor Rubish and Zane Simon, and we are here for the Anderson Silva versus Nick Diaz UFC 183 sixth round. That's the post fight. If you're looking for the fight, sorry, idiot. It was on pay-per-view. There's only 5 rounds. Everybody else give us a like because the haters that are looking for free fights are going to give us unlikes. So if you like this, if you like our brand of crap, give us a likes. If you're reserving judgment, reserve judgment. Give us a like at the end of the show. Anyway,
Don't reserve
big
judgment. Just give us a like right away. We don't
That's
want
Yeah,
it.
like,
that's true.
we don't
We
want
don't
to
Some of
want
these
question
you.
our
idiots have been
quality.
complaining in the YouTube comments. How can I like it before I watch it? Look, you know what you're watching. Give us a
Yeah,
like.
we
We
don't
got
want it to be
fuckers
based on
on.
the quality of the show.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no. But UFC 183 caps off one of the best months in UFC history. The future doesn't look quite as bright, but I felt like Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz delivered what it promised, which was a really good fight between two notable, well-known MMA figures. I mean, nobody laid down and died. Nobody coasted. Both guys gave it their all. Anderson Silva, no surprise that he's the smoother striker. That Nick Diaz couldn't turn on the volume game. Nick Diaz poured it on early, and then Silva countered, and then established dominance. And for the rest of the fight, he didn't coast, but he dominated. He tried some pretty slick shit. Diaz didn't catch Diaz, but and the rest of the card was pretty good. The Gestel Woodley fight was a little bit of a disappointment. The rest of the card was pretty good, but let's get your quick thoughts on the card as a whole, Connor, before we go into the main event.
The whole card as a whole,
The card as a whole.
I was down with it. I enjoyed it actually a lot more than I expected to for some of those fights. Natal Watson is one that stood out as being more pleasant than I certainly expected it to be.
The expectations were low for that one, so it definitely
Yeah.
exceeded. And Misha Tate, I should have stuck to my guns on the vivisection because Eugene and I were all about Misha Tate on the Care Don't Care.
Well, we'll talk about that decision later on, I
Yeah.
think, but it was
I-
definitely a good fight.
yes, indeed. And Zane, your thoughts on the card as a whole?
Yeah, I like the whole card. I think that the last two fights were unfortunately weird. I mean, I expected Anderson Silva, Nick Diaz to be weird. I was happy with that level of weirdness. But I think that for like it was a little problematic in that it came right after another weird fight that nobody was expecting to be weird.
After the
And
weight cut troubles, I was expecting that fight to be lame. I mean,
I was expecting Woodley to be dominant because of that, and I was kind of personally a bit shocked that he wasn't. So
yeah, yeah. Well, Woodley, as we talked about in the vivisection, Tyron Woodley is a guy who it's not that you can't count on him, it's just that you don't know which Woodley's going to show up, and he never put the pedal to the metal. I never saw him throw a combination. He threw a lot of hard single shots, but maybe he threw a combination. I'm forgetting it. But there was a lot of times I was screaming, "Follow it up, 1-2, 1-2," and it wasn't happening. But the main event, let's talk about the main event. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I found the first 2 rounds pretty thrilling. And I mean, just the excitement of seeing Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz in the cage together. To me, it's like people are complaining about this fight. It's like kids. Look, I remember when Sugar Ray Leonard fought Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and all the smart boxing fans were like, "Oh, they should have fought 5 years ago. This fight is nothing." Blah blah blah. I'm still telling my kid about that fight. Like, this is a fight people are going to remember. My wife asked me who was fighting today, and I go Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz, and she goes, "Oh, really? That sounds pretty cool." These are legends. They're fighting each other. It's legendary. I mean, that's just what it is. It's not the greatest fight of all time. It's not the greatest fight of either man's career, but it's pretty fucking badass. So, Connor, what happened? How did Anderson Silva beat Nick Diaz? And do we agree that Anderson Silva beat Nick Diaz?
Yeah, I think nobody but Nick Diaz and other people who share Nick Diaz's fighting mentality. I saw Cole Miller on Twitter who thought the decision was bullshit. I mean, there's not really any way to call for a Nick Diaz win.
Who's his dope dealer? That's what I want to know. Like
Nick Diaz. I honestly, I didn't watch the fight with much of a scoring eye. I was just too caught up in enjoying it. I thought it was a really entertaining fight, but just going from my first impression, I don't really see how you could give Nick more than 2 rounds throughout that entire fight. Anderson
I give
was
him
just,
one. I give him 1 round.
and I think that was kind of how I felt as well. And Anderson was just a little more consistent. I think what we saw is that Nick kind of, in the same way that he did in the GSP fight, came in with like a specific strategy in mind, and when it didn't play out for him, he kind of just faltered a little bit because early on, I mean, he went ham on the taunting early in that fight. I mean, that was the earliest I've.
Back was advanced taunting.
It was the hardest I've ever seen Nick Diaz go for mockery that early in a fight. Like 30 seconds, he had busted out like several bitches, a middle finger, showed Anderson his ass, and then laid on the ground in a supermodel pose in like 30 seconds. It was like he was going hardcore on it. But I personally think that was a good idea. I thought he should have kept it up because I think it was starting to work on Anderson. Anderson in the second round was deliberately walking through Nick's punches, and that's not what Anderson should have been doing. So I think Nick kind of got caught up in what Anderson was doing rather than sticking to his game plan. And then the other thing I think was that I think it was pretty clear he was trying to get Anderson to lead so he could counter him with that right hook, and he just couldn't land it. Anderson, honestly, I think Anderson's like his defense was not there. As it hasn't been in many of his past fights. He got hit really easily to the body and to the head. Nick's defense was pretty solid, actually. But, for Nick Diaz anyway, it was pretty decent. But the thing is that for all of the decline of Anderson Silva that we've seen, and I think this fight evinced a lot of that, he looked better leading than he has in most of his other fights. He led and threw combinations pretty damn well. And his boxing looked pretty solid offensively. So
that's what I thought turned the tide. I thought Nick was trying to get him to lead, poured on a pretty high volume flurry in the first round, and then goaded Silva into turning it around on him, and then kind of got some, and was like, well, I've had enough of that, and then he kind of shut down. Zane, what was your take on the main event?
I did give Nick 2 rounds. I thought I gave him the
1
second.
and 2. Yeah.
I gave him 2 and 4. Yeah, I gave him the second, which I thought was close, and then I thought he took the 4th. I thought that was an ugly round in which Anderson Silva landed almost no offense and ate a lot of punches that he kind of shook off like they didn't land. Like he tried, and I think this fight showed me a big thing for Anderson Silva that, I mean, I think my biggest takeaway would be this is the kind of fight where even if one guy could look potentially good to the casual eye, like, oh, Anderson Silva, he put on a good performance, looked like, his old self or whatever. Like, this is one of those kind of like Shogun Hendo fights where just, a guy could win, and then his next fight, if he fought somebody that was remotely competitive towards the top 5 of the division, would just absolutely eat him alive.
Yeah, it kind of upset me a little bit because that 4th round is one that I also felt was pretty close, and it kind of upset me that like Goldberg kept calling Anderson, slipping everything that Diaz throws at him. Like, not really. I mean, he's kind of moving with some of the punches, but they didn't mention it when Diaz was doing the same thing, and in that supposedly clean left hand that Anderson landed in the first round of the fight, Nick rolled his head with it like Mexican boxer style. He didn't really eat much of that punch, and Anderson's head movement hasn't been that great for a couple of years now, and it wasn't that great against Bonner, and it wasn't, it was okay against Vitor, I guess. It was okay against Okami, but the Bonner fight was kind of a sharp decline, and then the Weidman fight, it just really wasn't there. So,
yeah, I think the biggest thing that I actually was kind of new to me in this fight is that his clinch game wasn't there.
Yeah, Nick actually had some good success in the clinch. A couple of elbows over the top, body punches. I thought Nick should have gone for that more, to be honest.
Yeah, and that is not, like, that's troubling, because that's usually where Anderson's been hyper dominant in the past, is when he hooks up with you in the clinch, he absolutely wins that fight.
It's strange. Oh, go on, sorry.
No, yeah. So that's like the kind of thing where I'm saying, like, it was a fun fight. I was happy to see it. I really enjoyed it. But if it was like, and now Anderson Silva's going to face Jacare, I'd be like, oh, that's not a good idea,
It's a strange decline, the clinch, too, because it's like technical details that are missing. It's not like Anderson lacks the strength or the timing, things that you would expect to go away with age and wear. It's like he's not putting his hands on the back of your head, he's grabbing your neck. And he's not whipping you around and pulling you off balance, he's just standing there and trying to throw knees. It's like a weird kind of thing where he has this confidence in his clinch that isn't actually backed up by technique that used to be very, very good. He used to be a superb clinch fighter. And again, the Okami fight was like the last we saw of that, where he even when Okami had him against the fence, he was outstriking Okami with knees.
In the Bonner fight, he had it.
That's true. Too. That's true. The Bonner fight was some good clinch work too. But then in that second Weidman fight, man, he got knocked down in the clinch just making rookie mistakes, like day one Muay Thai stuff. The first thing you learn about Muay Thai, grabbing the back of Weidman's neck, allowing space between their heads, trying to throw a knee when Weidman was just standing there stable in a punching position. Like, he did a couple of those things against Nick too, and sometimes just like reached out his arm and tried to grab Nick's head while Nick was throwing punches over the top. Like, it's not going to fly. And the fact that Dana White was saying that he wants Anderson to rematch Weidman again after this, I desperately don't want to see that. I will pay the UFC money not to have to watch that happen.
There's some big pressure, again. Supposedly. I mean, and this is nothing I heard in the back channels because I don't have back channels, but what I read was the Globo and the Brazilian fans want champions. That the ratings when there's a Brazilian fighter fighting for a title are much, much, much higher than when they're not. And the Brazilian
they better
fans
find somebody else.
Yeah, well, they haven't even, Fabricio Verdum, Jose Aldo, they haven't clicked with the Brazilian fans the way Anderson Silva did. Anderson Silva was really the torchbearer for Brazilian MMA, and they've been a fairly fickle fan base. And when he was talking about, I don't want to fight for the title anymore, I just want to have fun fights, his sponsors and Globo and the Brazilian fans were all just like thumbs down on that. We want to see Anderson Silva champion or nothing. And so that's where the pressure is coming from. And so
that's
there's
garbage.
Yeah.
Well, that's,
What a horrible fan base. Like, I don't mean to generalize a group of people, but anybody who tells their favorite fighder that he has to be fighting for the title or they won't root for him.
Well, a lot of this is advertisers and stuff, and so that is the definition of terrible people. You know? And it's just, that's the truth. It's people looking to make money at all costs, and, that's...
Anderson hasn't won one round. I would argue that he hasn't won 1 minute against Chris Weidman in every fight that he's ever battled him. So I have no interest in seeing them fight again.
I really don't want to see that. And with Weidman injured, and now the Vitor Belfort, declining to fight Lyoto Machida, according to reports. And I noticed that Belfort's coach put out a list of fighters he would face, and among names like Mark Munoz, which how valiant of him. But and nothing against Mark Munoz, he's just kind of a shot fighter at this point. But Jacare was on that list, and I thought that was very interesting. Now it would be a bold fight to see.
Well, they said they wanted, it was Gilbert Burns, who was on The Ultimate Fighter, I think, same season as Josh Samana and Uriah Hall and all those guys, and
Gilbert
Kelvin
Burns.
Gastelum.
I don't know who
Wasn't he Gilbert Burns?
No.
Am I thinking of a different Gilbert? Okay.
You're thinking of a totally different Gilbert, yeah.
I'm going to look him up while I'm talking.
Gilbert Smith.
Gilbert Smith, different. He is a UFC fighter, though, isn't he, Gilbert Burns?
He used to be Gilbert Burns is, yeah. Gilbert Burns is a Black Zillions member. He's one of
Different
Belfort's
ones.
teammates.
Gotcha.
He's the really hot shit BJJ black belt who's got hoofed coaching him to kickbox and fighting Josh Thompson coming up.
Okay. Well, that aside, Gilbert Burns hilariously said that they wanted Vitor to fight an Orthodox wrestler and named Luke Rockhold as one of the fighters that fit that archetype.
Yes.
I think it's pretty clear that what they really mean is we don't want to fight Lyoto Machida.
Yeah. They had Yoel Romero, Jacare Souza, Luke Rockhold, and Mark Munoz. Munoz is a southpaw too.
Vitor Belfort versus Yoel Romero. That would be the most ungodly killing.
I think Romero versus Souza are both very interesting fights. Actually, I think those are kind of tough for me to predict. Actually, although I don't really have much faith in Vitor's chances against wrestlers.
No, I don't have much faith in Vitor without the TRT either. So, that's the thing. But let's run through the any other thoughts on the main event?
No, I hope we don't see. Anderson Silva. I mean, the last thing he talked about was he might retire. That was the last thing he said was, "My kid wants me to retire, so we'll see what happens when I go home."
I'm fine with that. I would not mind. I think this is a great comeback win for him to put a nice cap on the end of his career. I think this would be a great time to retire.
Yeah, absolutely.
As for Nick Diaz, did anyone else think that he seemed way happier and more well-adjusted than he has in, all of the interviews and press, his post-fight interview, his talking about Anderson? He seemed a lot better after that 2-year layoff, just like he actually almost is happy to be back, whereas before it was quite clear that he kind of hated doing this. And just
I think he was pretty well compensated for this fight, I have a feeling.
I'm sure. But I just think, knowing the social anxiety, depressed, glum Nick Diaz, he seemed pretty cool with this. And I actually, this fight gives me some confidence in his chances at welterweight. I would like to see him go there. I don't, whether or not they give him a fight with Robbie Lawler, that's probably not in the cards right now, but shit, I mean, Nick Diaz versus Matt Brown, Nick Diaz versus Hector Lombard, there's a bunch of interesting fights for Nick Diaz at welterweight right now.
Yeah, Tyrone Woodley. Maybe
Tyron
not
Woodley.
Woodley.
Why not?
Well, Kelvin Gastelum would be interesting. But let's talk about the Woodley Gastelum fight. I mean, supposedly there were flu-like symptoms earlier in the week. Gastelum missed weight by 10 pounds. He let Mike Dolce go because he thought Dolce was too expensive, and Goldberg and Rogan were quick with, well, it's not as expensive as 30% of your purse. And I'm not the biggest Dolce fan, but clearly something went wrong with Kelvin Gastelum. That was not at all the same fighter we've seen in his recent bouts. And Woodley didn't pull the trigger for whatever reason when he had the advantage of the fight. But just a very disappointing turn of events for Kelvin Gastelum, a guy who was red hot going into this fight. Connor, what the fuck?
I didn't hate this fight. I thought the fans were the worst part of this fight, to be honest, because
They
especially
often
because it was a slow fight coming on the heels of two really fast-paced, excellent fights, and so I guess that's why they were disappointed. But I don't know. I thought.
I think also if you've watched Gastelum fight recently, you're used to really pedal the metal pressure.
Yeah, but if you've watched Woodley fight, like no one should be surprised. Like the thing about Tyron Woodley is he doesn't run over people. Like he knocks you out coming in, and you go away when he hits you one time. But he doesn't like hunt people down and knock them out. He's not like a Gennady Golovkin of MMA. He's a really heavy-handed counterpuncher. And Woodley's problem in all of his recent fights and his problem in this fight is that he's got pretty good defense. He's quite good at circling and picking off shots with his hands. He parries punches well, checks kicks well. Like he's pretty good defensively. And he's good at countering, but he's not good at creating the opportunities to counter. He's not good at making the openings happen. And so when he gets his back on the fence and somebody is kind of moving around and throwing feints at him, he just doesn't ever sit down on a shot. You know what I mean? Like 3 minutes will go by with him not feeling confident in his opening. And then once he gets into his rhythm and he starts to sense those openings, he'll blow you away. And he did that to Gastelum at times. And yeah, I thought Woodley deserved this decision too. I
have no problem with the decision.
Yeah, I don't think Gastelum touched him more than 2 or 3 times in the first round. Even though Gastelum was throwing 3 times as much, Woodley was stopping almost everything. And Woodley's counters were pretty good. I'd love to see him put together like a jab and a feint or something to make things happen and to create those openings. You know, it's he is technically a counter fighter, but it's no way to counter to just wait and hope that you're right when you guess what the guy's going to throw next. Like you got to find what makes him throw and encourage him to throw what you want him to throw. You have to, even if you're hanging back, you still have to have the initiative somehow.
And Zane, what do you see in that co-main event?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, I guess like I didn't like the fight because I was surprised with Woodley and even if I shouldn't be, and I realize I shouldn't be because I've seen it before. But, I mean, it's sort of that idea of, like, seeing a young fighter progressing and evolving, and it felt like more recently Woodley had started to find himself. He still had a bad performance against McDonald, but after that, he had he had a really good one against Dong Young Kim, and I don't know, it just felt like maybe things would click a little. Like, he lost that McDonald fight so badly, it was hard for me to envision that he would be willing to go back to that. But now, like with this win, even if it's a clear win for him, and even if I don't have a problem with the score, and I certainly didn't see Kelvin Gastelum winning the fight or in any meaningful way. Like I don't have any hopes for Tyron Woodley as a top 5 fighter. Like I don't see him getting to the title with the way he's fighting because he's fought the guy. He's fought guys with that style at the top before, and they've shut him down so completely that it's not even close.
Woodley just needs his whether or not he's in an exciting fight will depend entirely on style matchups, because Woodley he doesn't really adjust stylistically from one fight to the next. And he didn't lose the Rory McDonald fight because he got beat up per se. He lost it because he was just waiting and waiting and waiting and not pulling the trigger. And he did that for portions in this fight too. When he did hit Gastelum, like he actually looked a little more comfortable coming forward. He mixed it up and threw to the body. Couple of times he threw like a left hook and then a right hand. That was good to see, but I still have confidence that he can improve. We saw a couple of things. He showed a couple of things in this fight. There were some nice like slips and pivots that he used to get in on Gastelum's hips when Gastelum would miss a big left hand. I like that kind of stuff. It's just not at this time. It's by no means a consistent or reliable part of his game.
No. And what about Gastelum? I mean, Do we just chalk this off to bad camp, bad sickness, and you'll do better next time, or did you see something that led you to believe? I mean, is this going to be a pattern, or is this just a one-off?
I mean, the thing about Gastelum is offensively he's a pretty good boxer, but I think he kind of just leaves his head in place and throws long combinations, something that next guy we're going to talk about did a little bit, Ally Quinta. And so he's always a little vulnerable throwing that way, where he's got considerable power and everything. But I also think that this like alliance style of hopping around and being really light in his feet and trying to throw all these kicks and things is, while it makes him a little less predictable, it doesn't really suit his strengths because the dude is like a squat little powerhouse. If you remember when he fought Brian Melanson in his first UFC fight after Uriah Hall, like that was a wrecking machine, Kelvin Gastelum. That was like tight combinations, same flaws, but not as many of them. And now it's like Gastelum is not really. It doesn't seem to be fighting to his strengths anymore because I don't want to see Gastelum as like some kind of fleet-footed outboxer. I want to see Gastelum cutting off the cage and beating you up because that's what he did so well against Uriah Hall and against Brian Melanson before he started training at Alliance.
Yeah, I agree with that. Zane, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the same. I'm not a huge fan of the Alliance kickboxing style. I don't like it as a way. Like I'm not a big fan of when Alliance builds a fighter. I'm much more of a fan when guys go there and use their conditioning and their game planning and all the things because I mean in general Alliance one of the great things about fighters from that camp is they tend to come in very professionally and very well prepared. And in that way Gastelum's kind of a complete anomaly and that's I think more than anything this fight that's the thing we say, is this a recurring thing or is this just because of the cut? Well, the cut seems to be a recurring thing. I mean, this is the same Gastelum that showed up against Nicholas Musoke, and the difference is between Nicholas Musoke and Tyron Woodley. And, that's why Gastelum won that fight and lost this one, is it's down to his opponent. And if he keeps showing up in that kind of shape, then, he's going to keep hitting setbacks when he hits the top 10 or 15 of his division.
Well, it better to happen now than later, and in this way. He didn't get brutally knocked out. He didn't get badly injured. He lost a fight that he easily could have won had he come in, a little, not necessarily easily. I think it would always have been competitive, but he could have won this fight, and he kind of threw it away. I think the weight cut was a serious factor, and I think he didn't have his head in the game. Like even just from a mental standpoint, you take one shot from Tyron Woodley and you're exhausted, you're going to feel 10 times more exhausted than you would if you came in good shape. Conditioning plays a factor. And so it might be good now, just 11 fights in his career, still 23 years old, to have this fight as a wake-up call. This Kelvin Gastelum, the way he was going, probably needed a loss.
Yeah, I think you're right. But now let's turn to happier thoughts. Ally Quinta and Joe Lozon. That was a heck of a fight. Second round TKO for Ally Quinta, but Joe Lozon put on a hell of a fight. Really good game plan, and pushed Ally Quinta not quite to the limit, but damn close. Zane, you go first on this one. What do you think?
I mean, I think there's definitely a sense that if Lozon was a more dangerous striker, Iaquinta could have been in some trouble early just because of his willingness to eat shots early. I think Iaquinta, along with his whole ability to kind of check out, he definitely doesn't always. He tends to start with some big defensive flaws while he's feeling out the fight. It seems like he takes a while to get in rhythm and find his comfort. And while he's getting comfortable, he'll eat shots and he'll kind of have trouble figuring things out. Every time, the big thing was in this fight, every time Iaquinta moved in and out smoothly and really stayed moving, he would get in, throw a combo, move out, pivot out. Lozon was nowhere near him. And then for every time he'd do that, he'd come in and he'd throw one or two strikes, and then he'd sit down and he'd wait and look to see what he could do next. And that's when Lozon would just charge at him with 3 or 4 hard shots and catch him hard. And as the fight went on, Lozon he got a better handle on that, and he just started to pick Lozon apart. But so it's good to see him, at least for me. The flaws that have been there early in his career are still there, but they're so much lesser that he's winning consistently at a very high level, and that gives me a lot of hope for him going forward.
Absolutely. Connor, your thoughts on the fight?
Ally Quinta's lucky that he had Ray Longo in his corner, because Ray Longo made the right adjustments for him between rounds. I think Zane's totally right. I think Iaquinta does what a lot of boxing coaches just call getting greedy, where he would hit Lozon with some good punches, end on like a left hook to the body, and then either wait a sec and then start throwing more, or just wait there and kind of lose focus on, you know what I mean? Like, he got so hyped on his own offense that he forgot that this guy can still hit me back. And Lozon's not a bad puncher. I mean, Lozon's knocked out people in his career, and he's hurt people and jumped on submissions in his career. And Iaquinta came dangerously close in this fight to suffering the same fate as Melvin Gillard. When Gillard had so much ease hitting Joe Lozon earlier in their fight, he forgot that Lozon can actually punch pretty well too, and Lozon's always willing to throw back if you give him the opportunity. So, yeah, it's like Iaquinta had to be hit and then be told that he was getting hit before he realized, I should be fighting tactically and taking angles and setting up my combinations.
And do you think Iaquinta is on the verge of top 10?
Yeah, I think so. I think Iaquinta's has good matchups for him at the top 10. Who's in the UFC?
You were talking like Green, Barboza, Jury. Those would be the kind of, you know.
Yeah, I think he could beat plenty of guys like in the lower end of the top 10, top 15 right now. I'd like to see him bring him along a little slowly and just kind of slowly raises the bar of competition for him while still fighting tough guys. Fights with guys like Joe Lozon are great for him right now. Like fun action fighters who have name value but aren't necessarily still at the peak of their game.
Absolutely. And Zane, is Joe Lozon done? Where does he go from here?
Well, I mean, I don't know about, you know, I think by logical terms, Joe Lozon should look at doing other things. I don't know, but I don't know what's best for him. I mean, you know, like, he's certainly not going to be a top 15 fighter again, very likely, even if he's a fun and competitive fighter, as he was in this fight. I think that his best is going to be win-loss, 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 which has marked a lot of his UFC career anyway. And physically, you know, I can't say where he is particularly. Certainly doesn't want to get knocked, take a beating like that again. The more fights he has like this, the quicker he's going to be done. And he's been fighting for 12, coming up on 12 years. So, guys can't, people can't do that, especially when you fight the way he does. So sooner or later, he'll have to have that talk with himself, whether it's now or not. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to Talis Laitis and Tim Boetsch. This was a heck of a fight. Tim Boetsch was a guy we did not expect a lot from in this fight. I thought he really performed well, surprised Laitis with some hard shots, but in the end, it was the submission game of Talis Laitis. And funny, I was thinking early on in this fight, it was like, boy, I remember when BJ Penn talked up Talis Laitis before he came to the UFC, and it was all based on his jiu-jitsu game. And I was thinking as this fight was starting out as a pretty wild kickboxing match, boy, nobody cares about Talis Laitis' BJJ game anymore. But when push came to shove at the end of the fight, that's what made the difference. And that was fun to see. Really nice chain of submissions to get the win by Laitis. Connor, what do you make of this fight? Is Boetsch, there's much more Tim Boetsch to see, right?
I made a solemn vow the moment this fight ended to never count out Tim Boetsch again, because I really, really thought Tim Boetsch was going to get stomped, and he was very competitive. And I think what we saw here is perhaps Laitis being a little overconfident in both his own striking ability, particularly his defense, which was virtually non-existent, and also overconfident that his opponent didn't have much to offer, as basically everyone picking the fight was. And Boetsch came out early. And, when Laitis went and put Boetsch in the clinch early in that fight, and I think he was shocked when Boetsch just lit him up with a series of right hands and staggered him. And every time that Laitis would just kind of recklessly fall into range, Boetsch pieced him up. And I think maybe we're seeing a little bit of evidence that Boetsch, as an exciting fighter, really relies on style matchups too, because all of his fights where he's looked awful and like he's really bitten off more than he can chew were against guys who could keep him at range, because Boetsch doesn't have a jab. He likes to throw kicks, but they're not particularly accurate or well set up. He doesn't have a game at range. But in the clinch and in the pocket and against the fence, he's pretty dangerous. He's a powerhouse, both in terms of wrestling ability. His blue-collar redneck judo is a sight to see, and his punches in the clinch are devastating. And we've seen that in this fight. We saw it against Yushin Okami. We saw it last fight against Brad Tavares. And it's guys like Costa Philippou and CB Dollaway, who have been able to keep Boach on the end of the jab and make him look bad. So I enjoyed the fight. I mean, I don't know much more. What's that?
Jab was not something we saw much of in this fight.
No, there was no jabbing whatsoever. It was bombing right hands, and it was really competitive. Yeah. Lightus pulled it out like a veteran is supposed to, but yeah, I'm high on Tim Boach in this fight. After this fight, more than I am Talis Lightus. I've renewed faith in Tim Boach.
Yeah, and Zane, Talis Lightus came in at number 11. He beat Boach, who was ranked at number 13. Where does he go from here? I mean, is this somebody who's about to emerge into the top 10 of the middleweight division, or is he hitting his ceiling?
That's tough because the top 10 of the middleweight division is pretty stacked right now. I mean, you have a couple people who could be close to kind of dropping out of it in
Michael Bisping.
In Bisping and in maybe Belfort, depending on how his next couple fights go. I mean, Belfort's been great, but, you know, the whole, like, minus TRT, aging, a couple of big losses, and he could be going the way Shogun and Hendo are going, where they seemed like top 5, top 6 guys a year ago, and then suddenly they're dropping like a stone out of the division. So I think there's a place for him in the top 10. I think it's as a gatekeeper to the top 10, as the kind of guy that you have to beat to prove that you can stay in the top 10. But I don't think his style, I don't know that he matches up with anybody really well higher than him. Gegard Musashi would probably be his best matchup.
That's one that makes sense with Musashi having just fought.
Yeah, because Musashi, I mean, it'd be a similar matchup to the Jacare fight, except that Leightus is not quite as, is not quite as venomous as Jacare is.
I love that fight, actually. I think that's a great fight.
Yeah.
Who would you pick in that one? I've got Musashi in that one.
I don't know. That would be a great fight.
I kind of like Musashi, too. I like Musashi as the technician on the feet, and I know Musashi's dangerous on the ground from his guard to not just get out-positioned as easily as Tim Boach did.
Yeah.
Boach was pretty hapless there. But all in all, I mean, this is a fight people were bagging on before the event, and it was a very good one. And another one, go ahead, you had final thoughts.
I really loved this fight going into the event, and I thought it was going to be really good. And Boach is somebody that, I was excited to watch him fight because I knew he would make this a fun fight no matter what. So just for my own 2 cents, I thought that this would be a lot like it played out.
I thought I would be sad after this fight ended, and I was not. I was pleased.
No.
So.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And another fight, and the first round certainly looked sad. I thought Jordan Mann was going to feast on Thiago Alves. He did in the first round. Just made an enormous mistake with the veteran with some dangerous weapons left his spleen uncovered and paid the price. But I thought Mann looked great up to that point. I mean, Connor, where do we go from here?
He got a little wild. I mean, that's the one thing I don't like to see is Meehan's at the point now where, despite his youth, he's kind of a fight veteran. I'd like to think that when he's got a guy hurt, he'd be picking his shots and kind of being careful, the way that Iaquinta did at the end of his fight with Joe Lozon. But also, like Iaquinta, in the first round of that fight, he was like getting really greedy with his offense. He was just standing in front of Alves, and just because Alves is covering up, he was just unloading long sequences of strikes on him. And I'm not sure that was really the right way to go, because Meehan is such a good fighter at range. That he was just like standing in the pocket and trading. And then ironically, it was at range that he actually finally got felled. And I find it hard to really chalk it up to a huge mistake from Jordan Meehan, but I just think it was an issue of confidence. I think he did not expect Alves to have anything, so he was just kind of circling, confidently along the cage. And Alves actually threw a pretty tricky little piece of footwork in there to disguise that kick. He overextended on a right hand, kind of came into southpaw, and then threw the right as almost a switch kick from the opposite stance. And so, I don't fault Meehan for not seeing it coming, but you also can't get lackadaisical with a veteran of Alves' caliber. Alves will find the openings if you give them to him. So I would have liked to see a little more of a disciplined performance from Meehan. And I think that kind of may spell an end to thoughts of him as a potential top 10 welterweight.
Really? I mean, it seemed like a mental error, and this is a 25-year-old, much less than where to me, it wasn't like Miles Drury running up against Donald Cerrone. It was a fight that he was winning. It was more like Rory McDonald against Carlos Condit early in his career.
Sure, but
Just,
it's a 25-year-old with 39 fights. It's not like it's his first run around the block. I think he's going to continue blowing out guys like Mike Pyle and Dan Miller, guys that he can just wipe the floor with, and he's going to continue having fun fights, but I don't see him ever really being a consistent member of the top 10 with stuff like this because, against Matt Brown, he looked really good and then just kind of lost it and fell apart. And against Thiago Alves, he looked really good and then lost it and fell apart. It just seems like he can't really be consistently focused in big fights like this.
Well, and it could be a thing too where it's just, with that much wear on your body, because you're also talking about somebody who's, it's not even just like, oh, he's had 39 fights, but he's also been fighting for like 10 years. We're talking about somebody who's been in the cage as long as most fighters have a career.
Yeah.
And so when he, it could just be a thing where his body is not up, like it can't stay together for, he gets hit with something, and while he should be young enough to be like healthy and shrug it off, his body's just like, no, that's I don't have. It's not strong enough. It's not stable enough. Things he's got injuries that he's picking up and that are staying with him all the time. It could be stuff like that. Meehan seems like one of those fighters that could unfortunately end up being kind of a cautionary tale where everybody's hyped on this young kid who's going to do huge things, and then he's out of the UFC and out of the sport by like 28,
quite possibly. You guys are certainly harshing my buzz on this kid, I gotta say. What about Thiago Alves? This is a guy that going into the fight we were saying possibly done. Lots of injury layoffs, lots of losses, some brain problems even, aneurysm type problem. He had to have surgery, but didn't look good other than the big kick.
Mm-mm. I don't want to see Alves fight again, and I think that it's up to every fighter themselves to determine how long they stay in the sport. Obviously, they accept the risk when they become professional martial artists. It's just something they have to deal with or ignore until it becomes a problem. But with Thiago Alves, like I don't like to see a guy fighting after brain problems. After let's look at Jermaine Taylor right now, who's been in the news for threatening children with a gun and has been arrested some like
Those
15...
kids were talking trash, man.
His explanation for that was that at this Martin Luther King Day parade, they didn't have no candy for the kids, and apparently this is the reason why he chose to point a gun at some of the kids.
Well,
the point is that
very
Jermaine Taylor is a cautionary tale because a couple years ago he had a brain bleed, and this guy used to be a top fighter, and now he's not, and he's still fighting. And the fact that these guys, it's pretty clear the medical examinations are garbage. If you're going to make money for the commission, they'll let you fight. So somebody has to be around these fighters to tell them to stop fighting. And Alves was pretty fun in his fight with Bashinsky. Did not look good here. All the injuries, some of them really worrying ones, like the aneurysm you mentioned. I just I would like to see him retire. I can't tell him to retire, but I would like to see him retire.
All right. And Zane, your final thoughts on this bout?
I guess I don't know if my take's quite as bleak, but it's I understand it. Like I think the big thing for me is that it's a sign that and I tried to say this to people, obviously weren't having it because they are dumb, but whatever. I'm not that I'm going out on my scaffold here, but he looked, he showed the value of becoming a very technical, crafty veteran while his physical tools aren't there anymore.
Oh, sure.
Physically, he was getting beat up in the fight, not because he was not technical enough to win, but because he wasn't nearly as fast. It wasn't hitting as hard as Meehan. And, Meehan was beating him to the punch, beating him with combos, forcing him to cover up, making it hard to return fire. But then, you see him being able to do these crafty veteran things like setting up that switch kick to the body that's just brilliant and showing off, like, how fine that craft can be. And it's a tough spot. It's like, it's as a fan, I value seeing somebody have that craftiness and that increase in technical ability. But it seems like with him, it's come at a really high physical cost.
It's sort of like watching an aging, wily knuckleballer, face off a murderer's row of hitters, except that in baseball they don't get to hit you in the head,
Yeah.
Well, he used to be a fastball pitcher. That would be the other thing.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's just a far cry. I mean, I remember when Alvis was just a physical force that basically put an end to Kara Parisian and Matt Hughes as welterweight contenders, and gave George St. Pierre everything he could handle at one point physically. He couldn't wrestle with him, but and now to see him just get schooled on the feet like that, up to a point, was sad and impressive. It seems like he's here to stay. So
Yeah, it's not
see
going
what
to go
goes
away
next.
off a fight like that. There's no way.
No, definitely not. And so let's go down to the preliminary card. Misha Tate, Sarah McMahon. Misha Tate getting the win. So you guys disagreed with the decision? Is that what you're going to say?
I think at best it should have been a draw. In fact, I think a draw is probably the best decision that could have been rendered here because I think that last round was definitely a 10-8 for Misha Tate. McMahon didn't do anything. McMahon looked shockingly clueless on the ground from her back, and
It's like she had
Tate,
never trained on her back at all.
yeah, it was insane. Like she was making just like white belt mistakes. She was rolling away from Misha from
I was
side
spotting
control.
mistakes, and that's not a good sign.
Yeah, not a good look. So that was definitely a 10-8 round for Misha. I'm glad somebody chose to render it a 10-8 round, but the fact that two of the judges actually rendered it a 10-8 round. But the fact that Misha Tate's 40 seconds of effective offense in round 2 was somehow enough to win her the round on two judges' scorecards.
They like momentum shifts. That's
Yeah, I just don't see, like, as judges, boxing judges are instructed to score fights minute by minute so that each round has, like, a third of significant things that can happen. And so if the first minute of a 3-minute round goes to one guy and the second minute goes to the other guy, then the third minute, the big thing can decide the round. But if the other person won the first 2 minutes, a good third minute shouldn't automatically seal it just because it was the last thing that happened. This isn't Pride. We don't score fights that way. So I didn't like that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Zane.
Go
I
on.
was gonna say, I mean that's it, but it's not like the thing, it's not like the last thing that happened scored, was what changed the round. It's the biggest thing that happened in the round changed the round. I mean, that's the thing.
I don't think a big thing should win a round if the person, like, she put her in a guillotine, which she was stuck in for about 15 seconds, and then Misha continued to work for her unsuccessfully with one arm for 35 more seconds. So, if a big thing shouldn't automatically outweigh like 4 minutes of solid kickboxing. I just don't see it as that's a justification.
I mean, and maybe you don't, but that's consistently, I think that's pretty consistently been the way MMA fights have scored.
Yeah.
That's fair. I still complain about it. I mean, it's
Well, I
definitely
think it's just the
pattern.
mentality, the difference between scoring a sporting contest and scoring a fight. Like the idea is to establish dominance and to win, and so it's more like a war where it doesn't matter, how well you did in the early battles. Japan didn't win World War II. It doesn't matter how many points they racked up in Pearl Harbor. And so, I mean that's
Zane
the thinking.
Zane is losing his mind over here. It was quite a rapid climb and then a steep, drastic plummet in terms of my opinion of Sarah McMahon's improvement.
I mean, she folded. I mean, she folded like me playing poker. It was dismal.
It was like for an 8 minutes. It was like, wow, she looks really good on the feet. This is a big improvement. And then for the rest of the fight, it was, wow, she looks worse on the ground than I could have possibly imagined. What happened? I thought she was a wrestler. Like, they should at least know how to get off their back because that's something you have to do in wrestling.
That throw in the third round was a sweet throw, but you've got to know how to stop yourself, and you'd expect somebody who's an Olympic wrestler to land on top.
Yeah, especially because it's not judo. You don't just win with a throw. Like, you're supposed to pin them. I don't know. I found that to be pretty baffling. Like, I don't know if she just mentally broke, but honestly, it looked like she just did not have ground skills, which is baffling. It doesn't make any sense to me.
It really looked like she had never trained off her back.
I was during the fight, right after the fight. I just I was running the Political Twitter. I was like, that's a good win for Misha Tate. Like, that's a solid win. No discredit there, but that is a terrible, terrible loss for Sarah McMahon.
Yeah,
it could be a career-changing loss.
And people were trying to argue like, oh well, she did all right, and that is like she took that fight from herself. And when you do that in a fight, like, that is terrible. When you go out and go out of your way to lose a fight, like, that was out of her way to lose that fight.
Yeah, and the mental impact of that, especially the fight that you come out, land a huge right hand. She probably thought she had that fight won, in the opening seconds. She's, hasn't had that experience a great deal. Lets her get off the hook, and then gets caught in a guillotine choke, and just from there just panics and is just not in the fight anymore. That psychologically one would think, that's going to take quite a bit of work to recover from. But let's move on. Derek Brunson demolished Ed Herman. My kid needed some help getting his cereal, his late night snack before bedtime together, and I missed the entire fucking thing. Like I was like, okay, I'll run in there, I'll run back and come back, and Derek Brunson celebrating. I saw the dance at least, but
I missed the dance. I went to get a beer and I came back and it was done.
So I'm the only one who saw the fight.
I mean, I saw the replay. That was basically the whole fight, right?
That was basically the whole fight. I mean, going into this fight, there's one of those fights where on paper, looking at it, it's like there's no way Derek Brunson's ever going to lose this fight. Like,
no. Because this was more like the ghost of Ed Herman than Ed Herman.
You play this 100 times, and Derek Brunson should win 100 of them.
In a variety of fashions, apparently.
Yeah, and so the big question was, how awesome is he going to look doing it? Because he could just kind of grind on him for 15 minutes and, like, put together his performance where you're like, oh, yeah, Derek Brunson's keeping on winning, whatever.
Yeah, he went for maximum awesome.
Yeah, and that's great. Like, that makes me really happy because Brunson is going to be, like, along with Talis Latis, and I think more so than Talis Latis, he has a chance to really break in and establish himself as a top 10 middleweight. And this is the kind of performance that really helps him do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ed Herman, I hope he's got a retirement plan because I was not impressed with that. All right, now John Lineker, Ian McCall, supposed to be a flyweight fight, ended up being a catchweight fight. Lineker's been booted out of the flyweight division, and he can't blame anybody. He's missed weight half the time, and he's never made 125 pounds. Every time he's made the flyweight limit, it's been 125.5 or 126. So there's no indication he could even make weight for a title fight. But he sure shut down Ian McCall, and it wasn't even a case of McCall not fighting his game. I mean, McCall got the takedown early, but after that, once Lineker figured out how to stuff his takedowns, McCall just seemed to have nothing for him.
Connor, screen high five.
Yes.
Here, high five to the screen. Yes, that's for us. And that's for you, Nate, for your whole, like, I should stick to my guns when I know somebody's going to win, because you stuck to them, and you were wrong.
Well, it's true, and you guys would have made some money on your bet because Lineker was the underdog.
Yeah, it was a good. I actually, like, in my hypothetical bet, I think I put like a unit and a half on Lineker. I placed a pretty hefty underdog bet because I really felt, and boy, I was not feeling good about that after the first round because I really thought that was going to be the rest of the fight when that happened. But yeah, Lineker made the right adjustments, came out a little more cautiously, didn't get blasted off his feet. The thing is. By the way, did they mention that Lineker is officially being forced up to bantamweight?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dana White's all over the place.
I think that's probably fine. And honestly, bantamweight's
not. How will he do at bantamweight?
I think he'll do okay. It's not a super deep.
He'll be top 10, top 15 fighter.
Yeah, I think so. I think honestly, I think at bantamweight he could afford to put on a little bit of muscle. Like, he could put on some mass, and carry his power up.
And miss weight then.
Yeah, I could miss weight.
He'll be fighting Anthony Johnson in no time.
Yeah, and in 2 years he'll be fighting Robbie Lawler for the welterweight title.
Just be a little ball. Just a ball with a couple of fists on the end rolling around the cage.
Deadly. Very deadly. But here's the thing. This is my big takeaway from this fight is that when I see Ian McCall fight under pressure, he looks like a guy who's thinking like, oh, what move can I throw at him next? What's in my bag of tricks that might catch him off guard and surprise him? Whereas John Lineker is just doing John Lineker all the time. John Lineker is always thinking in terms of how can I cut off the cage or get him close enough to me to do the thing that I always do to people? So Ian McCall is like fighting out of his comfort zone, trying to hang with the guy, trying to fight creatively. John Lineker is just throwing punches. And it was like the same combination all night. Wide right to the body, left hook to the head. And it kept working. And I loved it.
Sure
so,
did.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is too one of those things where, yeah, it was like early on. It was just like I was watching. It's like, okay, well, this is how Ian McCall wins this fight really easily and walks all over John Lineker like it's nothing. And then he got caught in that guillotine, and I don't even think
everything.
Yeah. I don't even think it was Lineker figuring him out or timing him better or anything.
Yeah, true.
He jumped on that guillotine, and that scared McCall off his game so much that he stopped setting up his takedowns.
It was a
And
pretty
then
tight guillotine.
and then when he did, so when he was looking to take him down, he wasn't striking. And when he was looking to strike, he stopped looking to take Lineker down.
Yeah.
So he eventually was one mode or the other. I'm either going to shoot for a takedown from the outside that's easy to stuff and Lineker can see coming from a mile away, or I'm going to sit in the pocket and I'm going to try to bang with him and hope I can win.
And get blasted. So it's a double loss for the flyweight division because you got Ian McCall coming into this fight at number 3, Lineker came in at number 6, Lineker's out of the division, and now McCall's coming off a loss, and there's really no fresh blood in that division except for Kyoji Horiguchi, and so it's just very frustrating division right now. It's one I like to watch a lot, but Demetrius Johnson, is he currently injured? Is that what's going on?
It must be the only reason he hasn't fought because more than 3 months have gone by and we haven't seen him. And I love that about Demetrius. Maybe he just wants some time off. I mean, he's earned it. He's been the only active champ on the roster just besides Ronda Rousey.
It's true. And John Dodson's been hurt, and it's just a very frustrating division right now. So, hopefully they can get it together. But let's run through the rest of the prelims. Rafael Natal, Tom Watson, you already said, exceeded expectations. There's really not a lot else we need to say about that, is there?
No, Tom Watson looked as terrible as ever, and Rafael Natal looked a little better than usual.
Yeah, Tom Watson needs to retire, I would say. All right, Ildemar Alcantara defeated Richardson Morea. What's your nickname for Morea?
It was Rick Monstro, isn't it?
Monstro.
That is his nickname.
That's his nickname, yeah.
That's his
not
nickname.
mine.
So,
I wouldn't have nicknamed him that.
no, it's not very monstrous, but split decision. I wasn't enjoying the fight.
Yeah, it was okay. It was like a really, really poor man's version of Rashid Magomedov versus Elias Silverio.
Oh God! Only not in the poorest possible, man. Like I don't know if anybody is that poor.
But do you know what I'm saying? Though? It was like Alcantara trying to use kicks at range to counter, and Morea rushing forward and missing. But like 10 times worse. More than 10 times worse.
10 times worse, definitely.
It was a fight where you have two guys who can't strike and can't wrestle. And that's your matchup. Like they're not getting each other down.
Alcantara's striking wasn't terrible. Like
it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't so good that he could dominate somebody who couldn't strike at all.
No. And then the opener, Thiago Santos, knocked out Andy Enns early. Andy Enns I thought looked pretty good early until he got caught and creamed.
He looked decent. He needs some polish on the regional scene. I think he needs a little more experience under his belt to come back. And Santos looked pretty good. I don't know. It was all right. It was a fun fight.
All right, and so that's our show. I mean, final thoughts on Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz. Last word, Connor.
Anderson should retire. Nick Diaz should fight somebody fun at welterweight.
All right, and Zane?
Yeah, more or less agreed. Or at the very least, Anderson Silva should fight Michael Bisping or somebody like that.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Do not rush him in. Unfortunately, Weidman's injured. Now there's a logjam at the title picture, so hopefully they won't be rushing Silva into that.
Or John Lineker.
Yeah, fight John Lineker.
John will barely have to cut weight to make it.
Oh, that would be a sad little fight. All right, well, that's it for our show. Give us a like. Subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube. Follow us on BloodyElbow.com. Follow us on Twitter at BoxingBush, BUSCH. That's Connor at the Zane Simon is Zane. I'm at Kid Nate. And adios, MMA aficionados. We'll see you next time.